Imagine if we believed that black men were actually human beings that could be harmed by other people and not just bullets. Could we imagine a world where black men were victims of domestic violence and intimate partner homicide without saying that they weren't the cause of their own deaths? What would it mean to imagine black men as human beings? Black men and boys experience some of the harshest social conditions of any group in the United States. Despite their trauma, their witnessing of or their experience of violence, black males are only classed as perpetrators of violence.
Good evening, good afternoon, depending on how you see it. We decided that we would do a live today, not only in preparation for our upcoming mental wellness speed dating event, which we'll get into, but of course, in light of learning about the brutal murder of Tyre Nichols. I am Shannon Hughes. I'm the founder of the Wellness Collective. If you're not familiar, the Wellness Collective is a mutual aid collective serving Allegheny County. We are focused on creating infrastructure where there is none, so that all of us, not just some of us, have access to our basic needs so that we can survive and thrive. But today, like I said, we're going to be focusing on, the tragedy of Tyre Nichols. And I do myself, I've been having to pace myself and breathe all today. So I urge you all to do the same. I'm not sure how this is all hitting you in your bodies, in your spirit, but it's been a lot personally. I do want to remind you to just be present in your body, take time away, breathe, communicate with your safe people regarding the circumstances and everything else that's connected to it. So today I'm going to be joined by the beautiful and amazing Miss Tamara Dixon. How are you, Tamara?
I'm well, as well as I can be. Let me say that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time out today to jump on here with me. It felt very, very necessary. As you know, I'm not a big fan of being on live or whatnot, though I do it. So that seems kind of weird, but I do it because it's necessary. And today felt really, really necessary. My first question for you is like, how have you been feeling today? How are you?
So, just in full transparency, it started yesterday when I was going for my Friday date night with my child, who's also a black male, and I had to have the pause conversation before going into a predominantly white establishment. What just happened, and to be aware because I'm not sure what people are gonna say. I'm not sure how people are gonna feel. So it kind of started yesterday. Um, and I hated that look that I got from him. Like, why are we even here? And I, we didn't anticipate this happening. And I said, unfortunately, we're still going to have to live. We're going to have to do what we need to do. And so today was just, I could feel the tension, the tightness in my chest. I actually said I was going to stretch today because I was like, I can feel my body is like very tight. And I didn't work out. It's just like a feeling of tightness.
That's real. That's real. They say, the body keeps the score. And just thinking about like how traumatic this is. This all is, right? Just like it's like there was like this moment of silence for, or at least that's how it felt for me from the last tragedy, like the closing of the case of George Floyd. And from there, it just felt like there was this collective like exhaustion, and we've all kind of just been like on, okay, like we don't have anything else. Like we kind of just need some rest, and reprieve. And it seemed quiet, though I know it hasn't been quiet. It never is. It's just a matter of what's in public consciousness. It seems like there's been a moment where like there's just been settled for since the closing of the case of George Floyd, and now this is like a like that deep, hard reminder that nothing has changed. We aren't any safer now than we were a year ago, 2 years ago. Like things are still in chaos, and Black men and boys, unfortunately and specifically, are uniquely unsafe. Or at least that's how I've been feeling. I'm wondering about what your feelings have been.
So that's my plight. He's 11, but he looks older, and that's why I had a conversation with him last night, because he looks like he could be 15, and so it's a constant conversation, unfortunately. But there's no difference. It to me it showed, right? We just were made privy to what happened on January 7th, but there's no difference, even whenever it looks like we are on the same side in one way.
Right. And to that point, so of course, like the not necessarily unique, but something that we don't necessarily see every day. Tyree, his life was taken by five other black men, older black men, older than him. He was only 29, which, to myself, that makes him a baby, like a little brother baby type, you know what I mean? And to these officers, to these men of the law, he could very easily have been a son of theirs or at least a nephew, like that is so wild to me. But of course, like the conversation that's been buzzing is like, well, where do we put race now, like in relation to police brutality? Like, what does that even mean now? I see you have thoughts.
So that's, for the first time in a long time, I really had, I'm very empathetic being a helper, right? You have empathy at different levels. But for the first time, the shoe was on the other foot for me. Like when people were outraged and they felt like maybe other counterparts who are either white or different nationality or different ethnic background, right? Some people took it personal, people being more involved in movements or being more active. And some people fear for their life because obviously here comes something else, right? A white cop killing a black man. Now this time it was like, bruh, I'm still speechless and still trying to find the words, and I think that's going to take some time. But I don't see any different outcome so far. It almost feels like the allegiance of the brotherhood, regardless, it doesn't matter. It's an old fraternal order that, I mean, it's clear. Um, there's no regard taken. If you're a cop, do you take into consideration who else you represent, or you only represent your blue brotherhood?
That's real. And that's, like that's similarly, like I don't see any different when you're talking about systems because like we're not talking about five random black men that jumped on this kid and killed him. We're talking about five police officers that killed this kid, right? Like, and so the system of policing is inherently racist and violent, and that's just a fact, And that's not to say, and so like there's a difference between the individual people who are police officers and the system of policing, right? Like in being a part of a system, you are inherently complicit to what that actually means. Like you're participating in, you're complicit in, even if you're staying away from just like being a part of it. Like it just like you're complicit in it, right? Like, and then for some folks, unfortunately, they're a bit more complicit and a bit more a part of the more violent and vicious and derogatory, nature of those systems. And this is what we see here. So I don't see a difference between, white, black, blue, purple, polka dot. Like it's the police, these police officers killed this kid, right? Like hiding behind a badge and hiding behind the system and perhaps being supercharged by the system itself. Killed this black man, like this black young man. And that's the only thing that matters. Like it's never been like, oh, white police brutality, it's police brutality. Like that is the thing. That is the problem. Yeah, I know that's been a thing that's been heavy on folks' mind is like, well, where do we place the fact that these are black men now? And I do think there is like some complexity there, right? Because like they are a part of the system, right? These are police officers, but they are also black men, likely a part of black communities. So now what like envy, the area that they're from, because now what do they do with that, right? Like, because they're not just police officers that they saw on Facebook or on the news. This is such and such from down the road. Like, this is like he teaches Little League. Like, his son goes to my kid's school. Like, I don't envy them.
the layers, the layers and the domino effect, like of that. Uh, just thinking about the ripple effect that impacts the community.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. And hmm, I don't even know if people know where to have a stance, honestly. I feel like people are just trying to grapple with the fact, like, really, period, however, whoever right did it. But like you said, we finally had like an exhale moment, right? Everyone was like we finally got home, right? We were all sad for a few years and we finally got home. And then this, so I'm not sure what that even looks like. If you were in my community where I lived, I wouldn't want my child to be near. I wouldn't be near. I wouldn't want anything to do with them,
Mm-hmm.
regardless, because now you're a walking target.
Right. Right. And then what does that mean for the community overall? Like thinking about like how big of or small of a role do they play, and even like going beyond them, right? Like when stuff like this happens, it doesn't just impact the people directly involved; it's everybody else, connected to them. So how are their kids going to be, impacted? Of course, like the Nichols family, like they're already like super impacted. How else, like anything and everyone that they're connected to, like what happens now? Like what do we do with this now? Um, yeah, and then beyond that, right? Like though it didn't happen in our backyard, like because it's systemic, it does impact us. So like what do we do with this information? Like what do we do with this level of violence? Callousness.
I think so. The other thing that it goes back to is like, and you're gonna definitely. I can't wait to hear you talk more about Dr. Tommy Curry, because I strongly believe that when we don't address childhood trauma, it
Mm,
shows up in adulthood
mm,
in one way or another. It might not show up that you're violent or aggressive. You may become an overachiever and you may channel all the great things from your environment in which you grew up and what was normal, right? So these are Black men who are in their mid 40s, 40 to mid 40s, right? And if you 20 years later, when they were young adults, that was a norm for police to probably be overly aggressive,
mm,
right?
mm,
To even rough them up, right? Or even for them to get hurt, and especially being in the South. So, right. So, if you did get caught, who knows what happened? And we didn't have social media the same way. We didn't have these major other ways to communicate outside of basic news, right? And even the newspaper. You have social media, you have underground chats, you have all these things that are going on. And so, 20 years ago, what was acceptable, not even acceptable, but more acceptable, more tolerated, right? I'm wondering if that was ever taken into consideration, if there was ever intentional work done, right? So I'm looking at a therapeutic lens. Did we ever address that and it just didn't show up?
mm,
Like, and then how they're trained. You can't undo what you're trained, like being a part of a system. I was in government for 15 years with children and families. Once I left, it's still a process for me to unthink certain ways, but it was extra intentional while I was there to maintain boundaries, which was extra hard because you get sucked into the everyday mundane things of the system, right? And then you think like the system, you respond, you react like the system. And so if you're not intentional, you become also an oppressor of people you're
mm,
supposed to be serving. And so for me, right, I've been owning my stuff and working through it, but that's because very intentional. I'm not sure if people are noticing or thinking like, this stemmed from not even just this moment, but let's go back.
mm. That's super real, and that makes me think about like Black people, we're not monolithic as folks like to say, but truly we're not, right? And so like we have we all stand on different sides of the gun line, right? Like, and so it makes me think about, and I don't know these men, I don't know what they're going through, I don't know what was going through their minds when they were doing what they were doing leading up to, like there was no reason for them to stop that child, which we'll get into. um I don't know. I don't know. But I'm wondering about like, the history not only of them themselves, but also their families. Like, what side of the gun line that they stand on? Like, have they always been on the side of the oppressor, right? Like, have they always been in this position of, upholding racism and oppression against their own folks? That's just a thought that I have, because it's like I can't wrap my head around why anyone who is Black would do that. And it's not like it's like, oh, something happened. It was like spur of the moment, a gun went off, da da da. y'all beat that man, beat that little boy, beat that young man to death, like beat him to death. Like that takes effort. That takes effort. It takes malice. It takes hate. It takes so much to do that, right? Like, and that's the part I can't wrap my head around. So, like, to your point of like going back to where the trauma exists, like their own experiences with law enforcement before they were law enforcement, when they were young men, when they were 29 years old, like, you know, like what was their positioning around the system prior to them becoming a part of the system. And I'm wondering what, again, I don't know what's going on with these guys. Like, I don't know what was going on before, during, or after. All we can do is pray for their spirit and whatever accountability is owed, that they'll comply with that. But yeah, it made me think about that. And I'm also thinking about what you said about social media. And so you had mentioned something before we started. We were talking about the timeline, which I'm glad that you brought it up, because I was also thinking about, like, when did this actually happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you know, we're hearing about it now. We're hearing about like the body cam footage being released now, but there's no way that it happened yesterday and body cam footage was released. So can you shed some light on what the actual timeline of events?
Absolutely. So we just were made aware January 27th for the most part, right? But this actually happened the night of January 7th when he was pulled over with the alleged traffic violations. First, it started off just traffic, and now we see like there's multiple variations of the story. Um, January 8th is when they got the statement after he was injured, hospitalized, right, which is the next day. And so we still didn't hear anything. And so he's in the hospital fighting for his life. 3 days later, he passed. So January 10th is whenever they issued the investigation. And they identified him, Tyre Nichols, a Black man, 29 years old, Memphis, Tennessee. 4 days later, that's when the first protest started in front of Memphis police station. And they asked them for the body cam to be released and for an arrest to happen. He suffered cardiac arrest and kidney failure and cause of the beating. So before the beating happened, they also sprayed him like literally to the point where he's inhaling it, right? No threat, no aggression back. And then January 15th is when their chief of police, Serlene Davis, says they reviewed the information and encounter and they took immediate action, serving notice of the policy violations. And that's when here comes the attorneys. The 16th, Ben Krepp gets involved. He's asking again for the body cam because it still has not been released. And then the 18th, the U.S. Justice Department, they had opened a civil rights investigation. And then the 20th. So from the 7th to the 20th, that's like 13 days. The 20th, the 5 officers who were involved were arrested and are fired with an internal investigation of excessive force, failed to intervene, and failed to render aid. And I honestly didn't even know all their names at one point, Tadaris Bean, Demetrius Haley, Emmett Martin III, Desmond Mills Jr., and Justice Smith. January 23rd, finally, they allow the family to view the police video with the attorneys. And they described it. The 3 minutes of savage encounter is infamous of the 1991 police beating of Los Angeles motorist Rodney King, showing that he was pepper sprayed and shocked and restrained after he was pulled over minutes from his home while returning from a suburban park where he had taken photos of the sunset. Crump says the family has agreed to investigators to request delay making the video public so as not to risk compromising the criminal investigation. And somehow it's out. So, of course, the 24th, the district attorney's office of Shelby County, they make a plan on how they're going to release the video to the public because they want to carefully avoid the chance that suspects or witnesses tailor their statements to what they saw and ask the public for patience. The timetable rankles activists who have expected the video to be released after the Nichols family reviewed it. The 25th, that's when the chief of police continues to back that it was reckless, inhumane, and heinous. And he's asking for peaceful protests. They issued a something on social media on the 25th. And then after that, the 26th, the charges happened and then they start to get released already. So they were arrested, fired, and then the 5 officers on the 26th, charged with murder, aggravated assault, aggravated kidnapping, official misconduct, official oppression. Um, and they said they each played different roles in killing and they all should be responsible. And 27th, that's when they released the footage nationwide. And that's where we're at now, is that we now know somewhat more of what they've allowed us to know once they released the footage.
Wow. Wow. This guy was attacked. This young man was attacked on the 7th of January. It's almost February. We're days away from February. This happened so long ago. And I just want to highlight the fact that it took for, the people of the area to galvanize to congregate and protest in front of the police station in order for action to be taken. And so like when we were talking about, there wasn't always social media, right? Like it makes me think very much on how often this very thing would happen, throughout our history, throughout this history, and nothing would happen because nobody would know it happened, right? Like, and so like just thinking about the importance of like when there is a call for community has to show up. Like it is our bodies that we protect our bodies with, right? And so it's not enough to just say like, oh well, that's just a shame. That's a shame that would happen. Thoughts and prayers. I'll share it on Facebook. Sometimes we have to do a little bit more, and it's not a lot, right? Like it literally is just showing up. Showing up with their bodies, making phone calls, sending emails, sending letters, making sure that folks know that you're a voting person, particularly, but also that you are a person of this community and you saw what happened, right? Like it's the visibility that protects us. It's our bodies that protect us. So kudos to those folks that got up that day and those days and were putting pressure on the police department, because otherwise, who knows if we would ever even have known this happened. Another thing I'm curious about, and I'm not sure if it's been stated, but I think I heard you say that there was a moment where they didn't know who Tyre was.
Yes. He was identified. So in the Washington Post, when he was identified, so from the 7th, his family wasn't immediately noticed. Sorry, Washington Post says they said stop a man. So he was never identified per se at the time, according to Washington Post. Taken to the hospital after critical conditions. After 2 confrontations. One allegedly occurred when officers approached a vehicle and he fled. And then allegedly that's the second incident because they never got to identify him because he fled. So that's how he was unidentified initially. And then obviously beating to the point, and then they just, whatever the story was, he fled. We never got time to identify who he was, right? So we just got him and we got him out the car and he's in the hospital.
Okay. So, but from the time of his beating, the police always knew who he was, like at that point. Okay. I just needed clarity on that because I was curious about like if he was beaten, was taken to the hospital and they had no idea who he is. Like that didn't make sense to me, but that wasn't what the case was.
Right. So initially they made it as if they didn't know who he was. So now they're saying correction, right? Body cam, the footage, you knew exactly who you pulled over. Because you ran his plates. Thank God for body cam at the time, right? And I don't know, maybe they forgot to turn it off, but they had all the conversations to try to figure out how to make sense of it. I saw a clip. I won't watch all of it, but I saw a clip briefly when I was like, say he has a gun or something about a gun. And so I just cut it off because I was like, I can't even hear the attempt to try to justify or make anything right.
It's wild. It's like there's body cams. Like they know they're wearing body cams. Like so, whether it was a mistake or not, of like how it all got captured, like these heinous crimes that they were committing, it's wild that it's like it doesn't matter. Like, oh, okay, and I remember, like, I'm thinking, like, I'm wondering if that's like a progression of just this viciousness that exists, or if that's always been the case. But we didn't always have body cams. And I'm thinking about, some time ago, years ago, I was in the car with a friend of mine. Who he had, worked on cars, so he had like the rims and whatever's. And we got pulled over for no real reason. I was driving the car, I didn't know how to drive it, so like I kind of like shuddered a little bit, like trying to turn the car. But that was about it. So we got pulled over, and that was fine. Um, Nell had, enough sense because he's been pulled over and attacked by the police so much that he has his entire car wired it with cameras. And so we're sitting in the car, and it was like, I remember this young Asian officer came to the window. I was in the driver's side. Nell was in the passenger. There was the other officers that was talking to Nell. And the Asian officer was standing here, and I rolled the window down to here, but someone was like, leave it there. And he was talking to the other officer and was like, just making stuff up. He was like, oh, well, she could have a gun in there. She just done a third thing. Like, we're just saying things. And I'm listening to him. So I turned on the camera on my phone, like the recording on my phone. I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. And now it was super casual. He was like, oh, yeah, I worked in my car. I did all the customization. There's cameras everywhere on the inside and the outside. So this whole conversation is being recorded. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, well, drive a little safer. And then that was the end of the conversation. Like, that was the end of it. So it went from a point where it was like escalating quickly to there's cameras here. Oh, all right. Well, y'all have a nice evening. And so, like, that being the case, just because there was a camera present, to this circumstance, there's 5 of y'all. Y'all are wearing the cameras. Like, your car has the cameras. Like, there's cameras all around you, and it's like you still beating, bludgeoning this kid to death. Like,
and so when you're saying that, it makes me wonder: is there an option to cut off the camera? Like, can they? Before, I know people were able to turn it off and on. So are they still? Do they still have the ability where they turn it off and on? Or they're not properly working, or they don't think they're recording, right? Because some people have cameras and they're not actually recording. They'll just be monitoring the scene. Right. So that's another quality issue, right?
Right. Yeah. Don't know how that goes now. That is interesting. Just thinking about, just where we are. Like, it's not like we're in the same place as how it seems like things are escalating as far as like the viciousness and the brutality. Yeah. So, to that, I want to transition, and of course, we have this event planned prior to, of course, Tyre's murder, but it just happens to fit at the same time. Like, it just happens to be right on time. Our next mental wellness speed dating event is going to be featuring Dr. Tommy J. Curry. Now, Dr. Curry is a phenomenal person, like, just super cool as a human being, like, very caring, compassionate, like, down to earth, just a regular person, like, but very, very good at what he does, like, very, very intelligent in his work. He is the founder of Black Male Studies. He is the author of his book, The Man Not, which I have right here. And what he chooses to focus on is anti-Black misandry, or otherwise known as violence against Black men and boys. His work is so profound, right? Like, because it covers the experiences of Black men and boys that are, I can't even say aren't known. They're known because it happens, right? But they're not acknowledged. Like, they're not acknowledged as real things. I mean, things like sexual violence against men and boys isn't even called that. Like, there's not even language for it. It's called something else. It's not called rape. It's not called molestation. It's not called those things. And so when they're not being called what they are, which is violence, right? Rape, molestation, et cetera, homicide, when they're not being called those things, we can't actually pursue what's necessary to protect our men and boys, right? Because, like, that's not the language that we're using. If we're saying rites of passage, or if we're saying, like, oh, he wanted it, or like, you're a grown man, or dismissing it in whatever the ways that
that's how things go.
Exactly. And that is how things go. And, like, and because we have this really dismissive, or it's either he wanted it or he deserved it. And therefore there's nothing else to do. There's no follow-up that's needed. So anyway, I'm kind of getting into the tangent of it, but I'm super excited about this event because Dr. Curry is, like, his work is so important. And not only is it important, it's backed up by empirical data. So Samara, I know like you've been rocking with us since day 8 of planning this. I'm wondering like, what is your thoughts and your reactions to Dr. Curry and his work in this upcoming event?
I'm excited because I never even have all the words as a clinician. There's no, unfortunately, there's nothing about, there's no real clear studies on Black men, Black boys. So whenever you're in the helping field, whether you're a social worker, whether you're a coach, whether you're a mentor, whether you're a teacher, there's nothing that gives you a better guide on how to engage and how to embrace, right, and how to possibly pivot the way you deal with them, or have interactions. And so for me, it makes me feel excited that there will be some better tools, right, and there'll be actual data. Like I don't have to Google, I don't have to search. Like this man is doing the work, not just in the US, but now he's over in the UK. So it's not just here, right, in the US, he's doing this on an international level, obviously, because it's not just in a US problem, right? It's also internationally a problem. So I'm excited that we'll have some tools. I'm hoping that people take the opportunity to jump on this because everyone interacts or intersects at some point with a Black boy who then becomes a Black man. Whether you're a mom, whether you're a teacher, right? Whether you're a coach, and you don't have to just be Black. The thing is that we're not segregated, right? We all live and work in some of the same spaces often. And so it gives tools and language. And honestly, for me, some self-reflection, like what can we do better? How can we do better? How can we stop dehumanizing Black boys as they grow up to be Black men? Because we want our Black men to assimilate now that they're men, but something happened along the way that, okay, he's 35 and he can't communicate. He just didn't stop communicating. Something happened along the lines, or he lost his power a long time ago, whether that's from his mom not looking at him as a young man, still not the man of the house, whether that's his community expecting him to carry the weight, or the cultural standpoint of him taking care of business, right? So he gets in the game early, he's with older women early, right? Or whether that's not allowing him the opportunity to make the same errors and failures of his counterparts who would be a young Black girl, or even his white male counterparts that he might play sports or go to school with. And so all of those things I look at and I'm like, bringing forward, this is why we say that the system is super divisive and division, because of the position they put Black men in for centuries.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad that you had, emphasized that it's not just for Black men and boys, or not even just for Black people, right? Like, because like what I wanted to focus on with this particular event, and I wanted to make sure that we highlighted, we held space for Black men and boys in ways that typically doesn't happen, right? Like we're always talking about Black men and boys, what they are, who they are, like prescribing these things, and rarely ever listening. Right? Like, and rarely ever giving space for them to be human. So definitely wanted to make sure that we're holding space for Black men and boys in this way, but also recognizing like they're not doing this to themselves always, like, like, and definitely not foundationally. And so like for Black women, like, as a Black woman, I like, similar to you, having to self-reflect, like, how am I participating in violence against Black men and boys? Like, how am I not listening? How am I not protecting? How am I not, like, how am I being complicit in the ways that Black men and boys are impacted? Right? Like, but that's true for like everybody, because as you said, we all intersect in one way or another with Black men and boys, right? We all integrate in our lives in one way or the other, right? And so thinking about, like, I have all brothers, like I have sisters on my dad's side, but I grew up with all boys. It was just me in the house. And it was, it was really clear to me that I was treated differently, and different in the ways that I wasn't treated as harshly as my brothers, right? Like there was a certain ways that they were subjected to that I wasn't. There were ways in which like I could move freely that I knew that they could not, even with family, right? Like there were ways that I would be accepted with family and they would not. And that was clear to me, right? And so like thinking about like globally, like how all of these different intersections impact our men and our boys, right? Like starting from their boyhood into manhood. And then our outcomes are what our outcomes are, right? Like, and they have to suffer it, suffer it in silence at that. And not because they don't necessarily have the words. They have the words. It's like, who's listening? Like, and sometimes they don't. But like I said, like when it comes to like sexual violence against men and boys, and Dr. Curry covers this really, really well. It's not even named that. And one of the things, and I'll step back a bit because I know I'm going on my little rants once I get excited. But one of the things that I was super, like when I first encountered Dr. Curry, he was talking about these things. I was super excited because I've been saying, like, I've made it a habit that when I would work with, like, say, like boys at Schumann when it was still a thing at a detention center, or working with grown men, I would name things like, oh, like this set of circumstances when this grown woman would put her, hands on you, like in a sexual manner or whatever, like that's not a rite of passage. Like that's actually rape and molestation. Like when your friend's mom or whatever, and just casually talk about it. And then quite often there's always like a click of like, oh, that happened to me. Like
Mm-hmm.
9, I was 7, I was 13, I was 15, and she was 35. She was my mom's cousin, my mom's friend, or whoever else. And then having like to work through that process, because again, like there's not real language for it. It's not called the same thing when it happens to boys and men, right? Like, and so, like I said, Dr. Curry is really, really great with acknowledging those things, like, right? Like, so I encourage everybody, particularly Black men and boys, and that's only because like y'all deserve to be validated in a way that does not and has not happened thus far. Though Dr. Curry and his team, in the folks who are participating or contributing to Black male studies is working towards now, but y'all deserve to be heard and understood and validated, and know that like your experiences are not a figment of your imagination, right? Like you're not making it up in your head. You're absolutely valid in all of the ways, right? Like all of the ways. But I'm excited to have Dr. Curry on with us, for him not only to talk about like these are the things, but also, like I said, like bro has empirical data. Like, so he's not just saying like this is what I think. He's saying this is what I know. We know is in record. Like we have the research, we have the data. Like it's right there. Like he's not super confrontational, but he is very a matter of fact. Like it is what it is. Like let's just move on from here. But this is what the facts are, which is I very much appreciate about him. So during the event, how we have it structured is, we're going to start out with a conversation with Dr. Curry. He's going to lay out like what he knows, like, his research, like have some discussion between him and some Black men. And then there's going to be an opportunity for a Q&A for anyone in the audience. And we definitely encourage Black men and boys to say your piece, say what you need to what you want to be heard on. Anyone else who has questions, right? Like we definitely encourage you to participate. And then after that, there's going to be a space for the mental wellness speed dating part. So anyone who has not participated with us in the past, our mental wellness speed dating event has been an opportunity for people who are seeking healing and support in their healing journey to match with practitioners of different types to hopefully match and help along that way. Right. As we know, you can't just pick a therapist out of the therapist tree and anyone will do. It really has to be the right person. Finding a therapist in the first place is difficult. Finding the right one is super difficult. So it's not uncommon for it to take upwards of months to years to find the right person, if at all. And you couple that in with being someone who doesn't traditionally or typically seek support in that way, it can be all but like impossible to do. So our mental wellness speed dating event is free, it's virtual. It's an opportunity for, like I said, for folks who are seeking support to match with people who offer the support. That way, it's 7 minutes in a virtual setting, one-on-one. You get to ask all your questions. You get to kind of catch a vibe for each other and see like, oh, does this person understand me? Do they share my language? Do they take my insurance? Are they accessible to me? All of those things before you even go into the door with them, right? Because there's nothing worse with like finally, first of all, tracking somebody down, setting up an appointment that might be 3 weeks out, having to pay for that appointment because not all of them are free. Having to figure out childcare, having to figure out transportation, like building up like the energy and the resource to even go, calling off work, all of those things, right? Like all of that is too much already, like in and of itself, too much. So our mental wellness speed dating event allows to cut through all of that. And you're not just meeting with one person, you're meeting with several, right? Like you're meeting with as many folks who are on the call who match your wantings and your needs. And they can be both traditional and non-traditional. So they're not just therapists. There's counselors, there's yoga instructors, there's Reiki instructors, there's spiritual counselors, and a myriad of other folks who offer some sort of healing support. So for this particular mental wellness speed dating, because we are highlighting and we're focusing on Black men, that space specifically is only open to Black men and boys. And again, acknowledging that Black men and boys rarely have space that is safe for them, meant for them, and their whole selves, right? Like seeing and understanding what their actual experiences are. So that particular space for this particular event is only available for Black men and boys, and the practitioners that we're asking to sign up are only it's only open to Black and brown practitioners for this particular event, and that's in consideration of safety. Um, Before I move on to the rest of the event, Tamara, is there anything that you wanted to add or comment on?
I would just say that it's the other layer that it's helpful is that it's the opportunity for them to test what does it even look like to have a conversation with someone about healing or help. And the other thing that I think is awesome, there's nowhere else in the world that you can shop even to see a doctor firsthand. You just got to go and be like, I have this problem. And then you're like, that's awkward, right? But at least you can say in these 7 minutes with multiple people, you can kind of get a feel of your, like you said, comfort level. But then also it helps the practitioners reconnect. A lot of people are practicing in a space that they're not necessarily gathering as much because of the day-to-day things, but it also gives you a chance to connect with other clinicians and strengthen like whatever you have going on, to support the work of one another.
Awesome. And thank you for mentioning that. So that segues into the other offerings for this event. But before I get to that, I do want to again emphasize that this is a free event for Black men and boys and also general community to participate. But also say if you are someone who like you match with someone, you're vibing, like I want this person to be my person, but they don't take your insurance or they don't take insurance at all, like where there's some sort of financial gap. Shout out to Staunton Farm Foundation and initially the Poise Foundation for supporting our mental wellness speed dating pipeline, because they have provided us with a grant in order to pay for things like scholarships so that folks can receive the support that they need. So like if you match with someone and there's a financial barrier, the Wellness Collective can pay for up to 6 sessions with that preferred person. And that's, enough to work on a single target at least and get your healing journey started. Until, as we continue to look at what does mental health globally look like for the long term. I want to shout out Dr. Timbo right now. Dr. Timbo was one of our early and ongoing practitioners who participates. It was in conversation with her and the other practitioners when we were talking about like, well, how are we going to address the fact that so many practitioners have a wait list because of COVID, right? And it was actually her that said like, well, I have a wait list right now, but so that people aren't just sitting on my wait list forever. She was like, she was the one that said like, I'll take them for 6 sessions. So I'm not taking them on as a full case, but I will take them on for 6 sessions. And that was so great. Like, that conversation with the practitioners was so great overall, but that's how we adopted that model from her as a clinician, that this is how we'll be able to support that initial, like getting started or ongoing for the healing journey. So like I said, if you do have financial barriers, we do have some bridges for that. In addition to the discussion with Dr. Curry, the Q&A, and the mental wellness speed dating open for Black men and boys, there's going to be what we call a practitioner's lounge. And that, to your point, Tamara, like the ability for practitioners to kind of meet and convene and connect with one another. It's been beautiful every time that we have our mental wellness speed dating. One of the most beautiful things is our practitioners being able to commune with each other. I didn't know that wasn't a thing that wasn't offered, or it wasn't just like space, like y'all just wasn't hanging out with each other. Like I just thought that was a thing. And I learned in this experience that that's not what's happening, right? Like, and so to be able to provide the space just for like that, that both casual but also intentional space for practitioners to just chat, to ask questions, to troubleshoot, to share space with someone who with similar experiences has been super beautiful. And so like we wanted to make that space more intentional. And so, in our conversation with Dr. Curry, when we were asking like, well, this is usually what happens. Like, what are you willing to participate in? And like I said, the guy is super, super intentional, super dope, and just here for the cause overall. Asked him if he would participate in our practitioners lounge for this event. And he said, absolutely. So this practitioners lounge will be open to our practitioners, both for mental wellness speed dating or generally, our leadership who shows up. And you'll be able to have a bit of a roundtable with Dr. Curry in that way. to kind of dig a little bit more into what you're learning, what you've learned about him, questions you might have that might have not been answered during his talk during the event. So that'll be open. And the last thing I want to mention is that, like, again, being intentional about how we're holding space for our practitioners. Uh, the party don't end when the doors close. There's actually going to be there is a practitioners lounge that's open to our mental wellness speed dating practitioners, where y'all can continue to engage. Only open to practitioners who are registered and signed up for mental wellness speed dating. So if you register for this event, be it you're participating in the mental wellness speed dating part or you're just participating in the event itself, you'll have access to the practitioners lounge. It's virtual. It's via an encrypted app. But that's a way, again, for you all to continue, our practitioners to continue to convene with each other. So I know I said a lot of words just now. Tamara, I'm going to take another step back. Did you have any other thoughts or questions or anything?
No, I think it's awesome. And unfortunately, the timing, it all just kind of worked together, but I definitely will be there. I think it's necessary. If we say that we are so woke, we all need to become more woke.
Absolutely. 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 And so, again, the event, as you can see, is going to be Saturday, February 18th at 1 p.m. It's virtual, so you don't have to go anywhere or anything like that. You can definitely check it out. It'll be on our website at thewellfolk.org/MWSD. Super simple. You can go in there and check out, just a little bit more information about the event, the offerings, and at the bottom you'll find the registration. Again, it's free for general community and for Black men and boys. We are asking, so you'll notice if you go in there, you'll notice that there are different ticket types. If you are someone of leadership, that can be you lead an organization, you're an educator, you are an elected official, you are a spiritual official, et cetera, et cetera. Someone who is charged with the community in one way or the other. We are asking that you check into those other ticket types. Those ones are paid ticket types. What the event registration goes towards is Dr. Curry's work and also supporting Black men and boys' mental health journey. With those tickets, we're able to extend, hopefully, the ability to add on more sessions for our Black men and boys who might need the financial support. So instead of six sessions, perhaps we can offer 12 or more than that. So if you are participating in your person of leadership, not only is this like a super, super valuable event for you and your organization and anyone that you are engaged with, it's also a means for us to continue to support our Black men and boys. And then the last thing I want to acknowledge, in our conversation with Dr. Curry, and why we're so excited is because he's very much passionate about his work. And so one of the things that he had mentioned was like, we can think about how to work further. Because, my question was to him, how do we get involved in your work? And one of the things was like, oh, well, like these are the things that are happening right now that, people can tap into, but also we can figure out what that looks like, right? And so if you're in attendance and you are leadership or you're a practitioner, and you want to not only further get involved with Dr. Curry's work, but collaborate further, this is your opportunity to do that. So definitely, I would definitely encourage you to sign up for the event, to register under your correct ticket type. For one thing, it'll direct you in the right way, so long as because not every ticket is attached to each section of the event. But if you do want to have that opportunity to get into the practitioners lounge, to have that roundtable with Dr. Curry and perhaps work with him further in whatever ways that materializes in, definitely register for the event. So that's all I have for today. I'm again deeply thinking about the Nichols family and Tyre and his life. I'm praying for his spirit and his transition, like holding deeply, trying to breathe throughout this day. Trying to just keep everything down. I've been feeling myself radiating all day with anxiety, quite frankly, just thinking about what that young man has experienced in our just general, this is our reality, being reminded, smacked in the face that this is our reality. And quite frankly, we don't know who's going to be the next Tyre, the next George, the next Antoine, the next Brianna, the next Sandra. We don't know. So very much feeling that. Tamara, did you have any last thoughts?
No, I've encouraged everyone to digest what you can, if you don't want to digest any of it, don't by any and all means necessary protect your peace, hold your peace, whether that's looking at the video, having the conversation, acknowledging it. You do what's best for you, because at the end of the day, nobody can help regulate anyone else other than themselves. So some people don't want to have the conversation, don't have it. Respect not reposting, resharing excessively, and allowing people to process, because it's like swallowing nails, and everybody's clenching and holding their breath again, everyone. So I would just, give people space and being more mindful of, this is not just something that just happened again, right? This is just something that's been echoing for us for some time. And that, this is a safe space. It will be a safe space for them. That I don't think this has ever happened that I know. I read books, I've gone to lectures, and I've definitely heard, Dr. Cornel West is about to have something, all these things, but real live, intimate Q&A, no. So.
Wonderful. And I do know that, in our outreach for this event, that there have been practitioners who have asked about continuing education credits. We are looking into that, so I can't make any promises, but that is something that we are hoping to offer. So stay tuned to that. Like, we will make announcements as we continue forward, but just, be on the lookout for it. Thank you for tuning in today. If you can, please, what we are asking is that you share this, not only share it far and wide with all of your networks, but also if you can, I would strongly encourage you to participate in this event, register for the event. Make sure you do it sooner rather than later. We do have a cap on participation, just to make sure that everything flows in the way that it needs to, and I don't want you to get shut out. We've had that happen in the past where folks wanted to participate in mental wellness speed dating and there were no tickets left. So just make sure that you register sooner rather than later, and please do share out this live and tell the story, right? Like, make sure we're keeping Tyre alive, and that we're acknowledging the work of Dr. Curry. So that'll be it for today. Thank you all for participating with us tonight. And again, the registration is at the bottom of the screen.
Imagine if we believed that Black men were actually human beings that could be harmed by other people and not just bullets. Could we imagine a world where Black men were victims of domestic violence and intimate partner homicide without saying that they weren't the cause of their own deaths? What would it mean to imagine Black men as human beings? Black men and boys experience some of the harshest social conditions of any group in the United States. Despite their trauma, their witnessing of, or their experience of violence, Black males are only classed as perpetrators of